The Undoing Bloodline, Chapter 1. Daniel Ashford had been sitting in the county archives for 3 hours before the pattern became impossible to ignore. He'd started the genealogy project as a gift for Claire, a family tree for their baby, something to frame for the nursery. She was 5 months pregnant, glowing with that particular radiance that made every moment feel like the beginning of something beautiful, and Daniel had wanted to give her something meaningful. His own childhood had been sparse on family history. His mother had died when he was 8, and there had been no grandparents, no aunts or uncles, no stories about where they'd come from. So he'd started digging through records, excited to discover roots he'd never known existed. The Ashford family tree went back further than he'd expected, all the way to the 1670s in Massachusetts, with branches extending through New England for over 3 centuries. At first, Daniel had felt a genuine thrill at the discovery. He had history, a lineage, generations of ancestors who had built lives and families. But as he mapped out the family connections, something began to disturb him. The male children kept dying young. Not all of them. Daniel himself was proof that some made it to adulthood. But across every generation, there were multiple entries: died age 4, died age 5, died age 3. The death records were consistent across centuries, appearing in birth registries, census records, cemetery logs, and family Bibles that had been digitized for the archives. Daniel told himself it was just historical infant mortality. Children died young in the 1700s, the 1800s, even the early 1900s. Disease, accidents, the general harshness of life before modern medicine, it made sense. But when he started noting the specific patterns, his rationalization began to crumble. The deaths always happened between ages 3 and 6. Never in infancy, never in later childhood. The boys would be listed in early census records, appearing healthy and normal, then they would simply stop appearing. Death certificates, when they existed, listed causes like wasting disease, failure to thrive, or simply unknown causes. And it happened in every generation. Daniel spread out his handwritten charts across the archive table, staring at centuries of male Ashford children who had lived just long enough for their parents to love them, then died in the same narrow age range, from causes that were rarely explained and never consistent. His hands were shaking as he pulled up more records. Birth certificates, death certificates, cemetery records from a dozen different towns across Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. The pattern held everywhere the Ashford family had spread. Then he found his own birth certificate. Daniel Matthew Ashford, born 1988 in Boston. Mother, Catherine Ashford. Father, unknown. He'd known his father wasn't in the picture. His mother had raised him alone, never speaking about Daniel's father except to say he'd left before Daniel was born. But seeing it in official records, the stark unknown in the father field, made something cold settle in his stomach. He pulled up his mother's records next. Catherine Mary Ashford, born 1962, died 1996. Cause of death: cardiac arrest. She'd been only 34 years old, and Daniel had been 8. He remembered the funeral, the confusion, the foster homes that followed because there were no other relatives to take him in. But what he'd never thought to question was why there were no other relatives. Daniel began searching for Catherine's family connections. His mother had been an only child, but she must have had parents, cousins, some extended family. The records showed she'd been born in a small town in western Massachusetts, Millbrook, a name that sounded vaguely familiar. Catherine's parents, Michael Ashford, died 1965, age 4, and Daniel stared at the screen, reading the entry 3 times before his mind could process it. Michael Ashford had died at age 4 in 1965, but Catherine had been born in 1962, which meant her father had died when she was 3 years old. That was impossible. The record had to be wrong. But when Daniel pulled up Michael's death certificate, there it was. Michael James Ashford, born 1961, died 1965. Cause of death: progressive developmental regression. Developmental regression. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He'd never seen that term used as a cause of death before. He searched for other instances in the Ashford family records. The phrase appeared again and again, especially in records from the 20th century when medical terminology had become more specific. Developmental regression, age regression, reverse maturation syndrome. The older records used vaguer terms, turned back, grew young again, unmade. But they were describing the same phenomenon. The male Ashford children weren't dying of disease. They were aging backwards. Daniel's vision blurred as the archive room seemed to tilt around him. This wasn't possible. People didn't age backwards. It was fantasy, horror fiction, the kind of thing that didn't happen in reality. But the records went back 300 years across dozens of towns, documented by different doctors, different record keepers, different branches of the family. Either there was a massive, multi-century conspiracy to fabricate the same impossible story, or it was real. Daniel gathered his papers with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He needed to go home, needed to think, needed to figure out what this meant. But as he packed up his research materials, one more document caught his eye, a letter, digitized from the Millbrook Historical Society collection, dated 1924. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, as if written by someone in great distress. To whoever finds this, know that the Ashford curse is real. My son began regressing at age 4, just as his father did, just as his grandfather did. We watched him grow younger day by day, losing words he had learned, forgetting how to walk, becoming an infant again in his 5th year. By his 6th birthday, he had faded entirely, as if he had never been born at all. I have tried everything to break this curse: prayers, doctors, spiritualists, anyone who claimed they could help. Nothing stops the regression once it begins. The curse affects only the male line, passing from father to son, inevitable and unstoppable. If you are reading this and you are an Ashford man, know that your sons are already doomed. The only mercy I can offer is this warning. Do not have children. End the line with yourself. It is kinder than watching them unmade. Margaret Ashford, 1924. Daniel sat frozen in his chair, the letter still displayed on the screen in front of him. Margaret Ashford had watched her son age backwards until he disappeared, and she had tried to warn future generations to stop having children. But the Ashford line hadn't stopped. It had continued for another 100 years, with male children born in every generation, most of them dying young in that same terrible way. Except for Daniel. Why had Daniel survived? Why had he lived past age 6, past age 10, past age 20? Why was he 36 years old and healthy while generations of male Ashford children had regressed and faded by age 6? His mother. It had to be his mother. Catherine had somehow protected him, saved him from the curse that had claimed so many before him. But she died when he was 8, taking whatever knowledge or protection she'd provided to her grave. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Claire. Baby kick today. Can't wait to show you when you get home. Love you. He stared at the message, at the heart emoji, at the casual joy that filled every word. Claire was 5 months pregnant with their child. Their baby, who they didn't yet know was a boy or a girl, who Claire was already singing to and talking to and loving with the fierce protectiveness of impending motherhood. Daniel looked back at the genealogical records spread across the screen, at 300 years of male children who had been born, loved, and then slowly unmade until they disappeared entirely. He couldn't tell Claire. Not yet. Not until he understood more. Not until he had some kind of solution or hope to offer along with the horror. Besides, they didn't even know the baby's gender yet. The ultrasound was scheduled for next week. Maybe it would be a girl. Maybe his child would be safe from the curse that had claimed so many before. But as Daniel drove home in the gathering darkness, past houses where families were sitting down to dinner and children were laughing and life continued in its normal, beautiful way, he knew in his bones what the ultrasound would show. He was having a son. And that son was already doomed. Chapter 2. Daniel barely slept that night. He lay beside Claire, listening to her peaceful breathing, feeling the occasional flutter of movement from her belly when she shifted position. Their baby. Their son, he was certain now, turning in the womb, alive and growing and completely unaware that he'd been born into a bloodline that would unmake him before he reached 1st grade. At 3 a.m., Daniel gave up on sleep and moved to his home office, closing the door carefully so he wouldn't wake Claire. He opened his laptop and began the obsessive research that would consume every free moment for the next week. He started with medical literature, searching for any documented cases of reverse aging, developmental regression, or age reversal syndromes. Benjamin Button syndrome was fiction. Progeria caused rapid aging, not regression. There were cases of neurological conditions that caused adults to lose learned behaviors, but nothing that made children physically younger. Nothing in legitimate medical science explained what the Ashford family records documented. So Daniel turned to historical accounts, folklore, and the kind of sources he'd never imagined taking seriously. Stories of curses, of families marked by supernatural afflictions, of bargains made centuries ago that bound descendants to impossible fates. The more he read, the more he understood that the Ashford curse fit a pattern that appeared across different cultures and time periods. Generational curses, usually stemming from some original transgression or bargain, affecting specific bloodlines in specific ways. The details varied, but the core concept was consistent. An ancestor's action creating consequences that rippled forward through time, marking every generation until someone found a way to break the curse or the bloodline died out entirely. By dawn, Daniel had filled a notebook with research notes, potential explanations, and a growing list of questions that had no easy answers. How did Mom protect me? Why does the curse only affect males? Who or what cursed the Ashford family? Can the curse be broken? Is there anyone still alive who knows the truth? That last question gave Daniel an idea. He pulled up the genealogical records again and started looking for living Ashford family members. He'd assumed he had no relatives, but if the family tree extended back 300 years, there had to be distant cousins, other branches of the family who might have survived. Most of the lines he traced ended the same way his had, with male children dying young and female descendants either dying without children or marrying and taking other names. But there was one branch that caught his attention. A line that had moved to Maine in the 1950s and appeared to still have living members. Thomas Ashford, born 1982, currently living in Portland, Maine. According to social media searches, Thomas was a marine biologist who worked at a research institute. More importantly, he was a male Ashford who had survived into his 40s. Daniel stared at Thomas's profile photo, a man about his own age, standing on a boat with ocean behind him, smiling at the camera. He looked healthy, normal, alive. If Thomas had survived the curse, he might know something about how to protect against it. Daniel drafted and deleted 3 different messages before finally settling on something simple. Hi Thomas. I know this is going to sound strange, but I believe we're distant cousins through the Ashford family line. I'm doing genealogical research and have some questions about family history that I'm hoping you might be able to help with. Would you be willing to talk? Daniel Ashford. He sent the message and immediately felt ridiculous. What was he going to say if Thomas responded? Hi. Did you know our family is cursed and our male children age backwards until they disappear? Thomas would think he was insane. But 3 hours later, while Daniel was mechanically going through the motions of his day job, he worked in IT support, a career he'd fallen into more than chosen. His phone buzzed with a response. Daniel, yes, I know about the curse. We should talk in person. How soon can you get to Maine? Daniel stared at the message, his heart pounding. Thomas knew. Thomas knew about the curse and was treating it as real, as something they needed to discuss in person where the conversation couldn't be documented or overheard. I can be there this weekend, Daniel typed back. Friday evening? Friday works. I'll send you my address. And Daniel, don't tell anyone else about this. Especially not your wife. Not until we talk. The warning made Daniel's skin crawl, but he also felt a surge of relief. He wasn't crazy. The curse was real, and there was someone else who knew about it. Someone who had survived it and might be able to help. Claire came home that evening exhausted from her shift at the hospital where she worked as a pediatric nurse. She collapsed on the couch with her hand on her belly, smiling when the baby moved. Your child is very active today, she said. I swear he's training for the Olympics in there. He. Daniel tried to keep his voice casual. Or she. I keep switching pronouns. We'll find out next week. Claire patted the couch beside her. Come feel. The movements are getting stronger. Daniel sat beside her and placed his hand where she guided it. A moment later, he felt it a firm push against his palm, unmistakably the movement of their child. Their son, who was healthy and growing and alive. For now. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Claire said softly. Yeah, Daniel managed. Amazing. That night, he told Claire he needed to visit a colleague in Maine over the weekend for a work consultation. It was a thin lie, and he hated himself for it. But the alternative was trying to explain why he needed to drive 6 hours to meet a distant relative she'd never heard of to discuss a curse she wouldn't believe existed. Friday afternoon, Daniel made the drive to Portland. Thomas's address led him to a small house on the outskirts of the city, close enough to smell the ocean. Thomas answered the door before Daniel could knock, as if he'd been watching for the car. Daniel, come in quickly. Thomas Ashford looked like the profile photo but more worn, with shadows under his eyes that suggested he didn't sleep well. He led Daniel to a living room that was surprisingly stark, minimal furniture. No photographs, nothing personal except for books. Lots of books, many of them old, many with titles related to folklore, curses, and supernatural phenomena. Coffee? Thomas asked. Sure. They sat across from each other in the sparse living room, and Thomas studied Daniel with an intensity that was uncomfortable. You survived, Thomas said finally. Just like me. My mother did something. I don't know what. She died when I was 8. Catherine. I knew of her. She was remarkable in what she accomplished. Thomas set down his coffee cup. Do you know why you're here, Daniel? I mean, really, why? I found the genealogical records, the pattern of male children dying young. I need to know how to protect. Daniel's voice caught. My wife is pregnant. We find out the gender next week. Thomas's expression shifted to something between pity and resignation. And you already know it's a boy. I don't know, but you know. The same way I knew my daughter would be safe but my son wouldn't be. Thomas stood and walked to the window. The curse is real, Daniel. It's been killing Ashford males for over 300 years. Your mother found a way to protect you, but that protection died with her. You don't have it anymore. But you survived. You're here, you're alive. How? I don't have children, Daniel. That's how I survived past age 6. My mother protected me the same way yours did. But the protection doesn't extend to our children. If we have sons, they're born without it. Daniel felt the room spin. There has to be a way to break the curse. Your mother did it. My mother did it. They didn't break the curse. They diverted it temporarily for 1 generation. The curse still exists, still claims its victims. We just got lucky. Then I need to learn how to divert it again. For my son. Thomas turned from the window, his expression dark. Your son is already marked, Daniel. The moment he was conceived, the curse began. Nothing you do after birth will change that. I don't believe that. I can't believe that. Then you're going to watch your child age backwards until he fades into nothing. And there's not a damn thing you can do to stop it. Thomas's voice was harsh, but his eyes held genuine pain. I've seen it happen. My cousin had a son. Beautiful boy, happy and healthy until he turned 4. Then it started the regression. Little things at first, losing words he knew, forgetting skills he'd mastered. By 5, he couldn't remember his parents' names. By 6, he was an infant again. And then what? And then he wasn't there anymore. Just gone. Like he'd never been born. Daniel stood abruptly, needing to move, needing to do something other than sit and accept what Thomas was telling him. There has to be a way to break the curse. Someone cursed the family in the first place. There must be a way to end it. Oh, there's a way. Thomas's smile was bitter. But it requires finding the person who created the curse and making them end it. Good luck with that, given she's been alive for over 300 years. Daniel froze. What? The curse isn't some abstract supernatural force, Daniel. It was created by a specific person for a specific purpose. Our ancestor, Constance Ashford, made a bargain in 1673. She wanted immortality, and she got it by trading away the lifespans of every male descendant who would ever be born. We age forward. Our sons age backward. And she lives forever on the stolen time. The room seemed to contract around Daniel as the full horror of what Thomas was saying sank in. You're saying the person who cursed our family is still alive? Very much so. She's been feeding on Ashford males for 3 centuries, and she has no intention of stopping. Where is she? Thomas looked at Daniel for a long moment. You're really going to do this? Try to confront her. I have to. For my son. Your son who isn't even born yet, who you don't even know for certain is a boy? I know, Daniel said quietly. I know it's a son. Thomas walked to a bookshelf and pulled out a leather journal, old and worn. This belonged to my mother. It has everything she learned about the curse, including the last known location of Constance Ashford. He handed the journal to Daniel. But I'm warning you, Constance isn't someone you can negotiate with or appeal to. She's been alive for over 300 years by consuming her own descendants. She won't give that up just because you ask nicely. I don't care. I have to try. Then you'll die trying, and your son will still fade, and your wife will lose both of you. Thomas sat back down, looking exhausted. That's what happened to everyone else who tried. Daniel clutched the journal. Did your mother try? Yes, that's how she learned how to protect me. She went to Constance and made a deal. 1 generation of protection in exchange for something. My mother never told me what she traded, but it must have been significant because Constance agreed. Then I'll make the same deal. You can't. Constance doesn't make the same deal twice. Whatever your mother gave up to protect you, that opportunity is gone. Thomas stood and walked Daniel to the door. Read the journal. Learn everything you can about Constance. But Daniel, she's not going to help you. She's going to find your desperation amusing. And then she's going to watch your son fade just like all the others. Daniel left Thomas's house with the journal and a crushing sense of inevitability. But as he drove back toward Boston in the gathering darkness, he forced himself to think rationally. His mother had found a way to protect him. That meant protection was possible. If Constance wouldn't negotiate, then he'd find another way. He'd learn everything about the curse, find its weaknesses, discover what his mother had known. He wouldn't let his son fade into nothing. But first, he had to survive the ultrasound appointment in 4 days, where he would learn with absolute certainty whether his fears were justified. And then he would have to decide whether to tell Claire that their child was cursed before he even took his first breath. Chapter 3. Daniel spent the next 3 days reading Thomas's mother's journal obsessively. He read it during lunch breaks, stayed up late after Claire fell asleep, even brought it into the bathroom when he needed privacy to process what he was learning. Margaret Ashford, Thomas's mother, had been meticulous in her research. The journal documented decades of investigation into the family curse, including interviews with elderly relatives, historical research, and her own tragic first-hand experience watching a nephew regress and fade. But it was the entries about Constance that made Daniel's blood run cold. June 15, 1981. I finally found her. Constance Ashford lives in Blackwood, Vermont, in the same house that's been in family records since 1698. She doesn't hide. Why would she? No one believes in curses anymore, and even if they did, what would they do about it? I went to her house today. She answered the door herself, looking perhaps 50 years old, though I know she was born in 1652. She invited me in for tea, as if we were old friends catching up. You must be here about the curse, she said with this little smile, like it was a joke between us. Another generation discovering the truth. How delightful. I told her about my nephew, about watching him regress. I begged her to stop it, to end the curse. She listened with this expression of polite interest, like I was telling her about the weather. But why would I stop? She asked. The arrangement works perfectly. Your bloodline feeds my immortality, and I maintain a comfortable existence. It's quite elegant, really. When I asked if there was any way to protect the children, she said there was, for a price. She wouldn't tell me what the price was until I agreed to pay it, whatever it might be. I agreed. I had to. Thomas was 3 years old. The regression could start any day. The next entry was dated 6 months later, and Margaret's handwriting was shaky, almost illegible. The protection is done. Thomas will survive. But the price? I can't write what I gave her. Can't even think about it directly or the bargain unravels. But Thomas will live, will grow up normal, will reach adulthood. That's all that matters. Constance says the protection only works for one generation. If Thomas has sons, they won't be protected. The curse will claim them as it has claimed all the others. She was so cheerful when she explained this. Like she was doing me a favor. Like I should be grateful. God forgive me, but I hate her. Not with hot anger, but with cold, absolute certainty that she is the most monstrous thing I've ever encountered. She's not evil in the way humans are evil. She's something else entirely. 300 years of immortality have burned away whatever made her human. Daniel read that entry multiple times, trying to understand what Margaret had given up to protect Thomas. What price was so terrible she couldn't even write it down. The journal also contained detailed notes about Constance's history. Margaret had done impressive research, piecing together the original bargain from historical records and local folklore. Constance Ashford, née Whitmore, was born in 1652 in Salem. She married Jonathan Ashford in 1670 and had one son, Jacob, in 1671. By all accounts, she was unremarkable, a farmer's wife in colonial Massachusetts. But in 1673, during what would become known as the precursor hysteria to the Salem witch trials, Constance's son Jacob died of fever. He was 2 years old. This is where the historical record gets strange. Several accounts mention that Constance went to the deep woods after Jacob's death and returned changed. She was accused of witchcraft but never formally charged. Jonathan Ashford died under mysterious circumstances in 1674. Constance lived in Salem until 1692, when the actual witch trials began. She disappeared from Salem records and reappeared in Vermont in 1698, where she purchased property in what would become Blackwood. She's been there ever since. The bargain she made, whatever entity or force she encountered in those woods in 1673, it gave her immortality. But the price was her descendants. Every male born to the Ashford line would live just long enough to give Constance their unlived years, their potential time. They age backward. She ages forward, sustained by generations of stolen life. The journal included a hand-drawn map showing the location of Constance's house in Blackwood, along with Margaret's notes about approaching her. She's polite, almost friendly. That's what makes her so disturbing. She offers tea, makes small talk, acts like a charming older woman. But underneath that performance is something that has consumed hundreds of children over 3 centuries and feels nothing about it. Don't expect empathy. Don't expect humanity. Expect someone who has lived so long that individual lives mean nothing to her. We're not people to her, we're just the mechanism that keeps her alive. The ultrasound appointment was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon. Claire was excited, had taken the day off work, was planning to go out for a celebratory lunch afterward, regardless of the baby's gender. Daniel had been trying to act normal, to match her enthusiasm, but he knew he was failing. Monday night, Claire confronted him. "Daniel, what's going on? You've been distant for weeks. You barely talk to me, you're always on your laptop or staring at that old journal you brought back from Maine. Are you?" She hesitated. "Are you having second thoughts about the baby?" "No." The word came out too forcefully. "No, Claire. I want this baby more than anything." "Then what is it? Please just talk to me. We used to tell each other everything." Daniel looked at his wife, her concerned face, her hand protectively on her belly, the trust in her eyes that he could give her an honest answer. And he wanted to tell her, wanted to share the weight of what he'd learned, to not be alone in this nightmare. But how could he explain any of it without sounding insane? "I found some concerning things in my family medical history," he said finally, which was technically true. "Genetic issues that might affect a son." Claire's expression shifted to professional nurse mode. "What kind of genetic issues? Have you talked to a genetic counselor? It's complicated. The records are old, incomplete. I'm still trying to understand exactly what the risk is." "Daniel, we have time. Whatever it is, we can deal with it." Modern medicine can handle a lot of genetic conditions that would have been fatal even 20 years ago. Not this one, Daniel thought. Not a curse that's been killing children for 300 years. I know, he said instead. I want to have more information before we talk about it. After the ultrasound tomorrow, I'll explain everything. It was a lie. He had no intention of explaining everything. Not until he'd at least talked to Constance himself. Learned if there was any possibility of protecting their son. Tuesday morning arrived too quickly. Daniel barely slept, and when they drove to the hospital for the ultrasound, every mile felt like driving toward an execution. The ultrasound technician was cheerful, explaining what she was doing as she moved the wand across Claire's belly. Daniel watched the screen, seeing the ghostly black and white image of their child moving inside the womb. So small, so perfect, so alive. Everything looks great, the technician said. Good size, strong heartbeat. All the measurements are right on track. She smiled at them. Would you like to know the gender? Claire squeezed Daniel's hand. Yes, please. The technician adjusted the image, pointing to the screen. Congratulations. You're having a boy. Daniel heard the words from very far away. Claire was crying happy tears, squeezing his hand, saying something about how she'd hoped it would be a boy. The technician was printing out pictures, talking about scheduling the next appointment. A boy, a son, exactly as Daniel had known it would be. His son, who would live for maybe 5 years before starting to age backward, losing memories and skills until he became an infant again and then faded into nothing. Daniel. Claire was looking at him with concern. Honey, are you okay? Yeah, he managed. Just emotional. We're having a son. They went to lunch as planned. Claire was radiant, talking about names and nursery colors and how excited her parents would be. Daniel went through the motions, saying the right things, but his mind was already in Vermont, already planning the confrontation with Constance. That evening, while Claire was on the phone with her mother sharing the news, Daniel texted Thomas. It's a boy. I'm going to see Constance. I need the address. Thomas's response came immediately. I know I can't stop you, but Daniel, be careful. She's not what you expect. And whatever you do, don't make a bargain without understanding exactly what you're giving up. What did your mother give up? A long pause before Thomas responded. Her ability to have more children. Constance took her fertility. My mother wanted a big family. She always said she wanted 4 or 5 kids. After the bargain, she could never get pregnant again. Thomas was her only child, and Constance made sure he'd be her last. Daniel stared at the message, trying to imagine making that choice. One child saved, all future children impossible. Would he make that bargain? Would he trade Claire's fertility to save their son? But according to Thomas, Constance didn't make the same deal twice. Whatever Daniel's mother had given up to protect him, whatever Thomas's mother had sacrificed for Thomas, those options were gone. Constance would demand something different from Daniel. Something worse. When are you going? Thomas asked. Tomorrow. I'm telling Claire I have to handle a work emergency in Vermont. Good luck. And Daniel, if Constance offers you a deal, really think about it before you accept. Some prices are higher than you can imagine until you've already paid them. Daniel spent the rest of the evening preparing. He packed the journal, printed out the location details, and planned the drive route to Blackwood, Vermont. It was about 4 hours from Boston. He could be there by early afternoon if he left in the morning. That night, lying beside Claire as she slept with her hand on her belly, Daniel whispered to his son for the first time. I'm going to save you. I don't care what it costs. You're going to grow up normal, live a full life, never know that you were ever in danger. I promise. The baby kicked against Claire's belly, as if he'd heard and was responding. Daniel didn't sleep at all that night. By dawn, he was on the road to Vermont, driving toward a confrontation with someone who had been alive for over 300 years, and who had spent that entire time consuming her own descendants without an ounce of remorse. Chapter 4. Blackwood, Vermont was smaller than Daniel had expected. Barely a town, really just a cluster of houses and one general store at a crossroads in the hills. The landscape was beautiful in the way that rural New England always was. with autumn colors just beginning to show in the trees and old stone walls marking property boundaries that dated back centuries. Constance's house sat at the end of a long dirt road, isolated from the nearest neighbors by at least a quarter-mile. It was a colonial-era structure, well-maintained but clearly very old, with multiple additions that had been added over the decades. The property was large, with gardens that looked professionally tended and a barn that had been converted to some other use. Daniel parked his car at the end of the driveway and sat for several minutes, trying to prepare himself. This was the woman who had cursed his entire family line. The person responsible for 300 years of suffering. The ancestor who had traded away her descendants' lives for her own immortality. And he was about to walk up to her door and ask for mercy. Before he could talk himself out of it, Daniel got out of the car and walked to the front door. The doorbell was modern, incongruous against the ancient wood of the door frame. He pressed it and heard chimes echoing inside the house. Footsteps. The door opened. The woman who answered looked about 50 years old, with silver-gray hair pulled back in a loose bun and laugh lines around her eyes. She wore casual clothes, jeans and a comfortable sweater, and had gardening gloves tucked in her back pocket. She looked like someone's friendly aunt, the kind of person who would bake cookies for neighborhood children and remember everyone's birthdays. "You must be Daniel," she said with a warm smile. "I've been expecting you. Do come in." Daniel felt his prepared speech die in his throat. She'd been expecting him? "How did you?" "Oh, my dear boy. I've been doing this for over 3 centuries. When an Ashford male survives past childhood and then has a son of his own, it's only a matter of time before he shows up at my door." She stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. "Please come in. I've made tea." The interior of the house was comfortable and modern despite the ancient structure. Hardwood floors, contemporary furniture, art on the walls that looked expensive. Nothing Gothic or sinister about it. Just a nice home occupied by someone with refined taste and substantial means. Constance led him to a sitting room where tea was indeed already prepared, along with small cookies arranged on a delicate china plate. She poured tea for both of them with practiced grace, then settled into a chair across from Daniel. "So," she said pleasantly, "Claire is pregnant. Congratulations. When is she due?" Daniel's blood ran cold. "How do you know my wife's name?" "I keep track of my descendants, Daniel. It's only responsible, given that they're sustaining my existence." She sipped her tea. "Claire is lovely, by the way. Pediatric nurse, how appropriate. She'll be such a good mother. For a few years, at least." The casual cruelty of that last sentence was delivered with the same warm smile, and Daniel realized what Margaret's journal had tried to warn him about. Constance wasn't human anymore, not in any meaningful way. She could perform humanity, the tea, the smile, the polite conversation, but there was nothing behind it except cold calculation. "I want you to end the curse," Daniel said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "I want my son to live a normal life." "Of course you do. Every father who comes here wants the same thing." Constance set down her teacup. "And I always ask them the same question. Why should I? Because it's the right thing to do. Because these are innocent children who've done nothing to deserve this. Because 300 years of taking lives should be enough for anyone." Constance laughed. Genuinely laughed, as if Daniel had told a particularly clever joke. "Oh, my dear, you're thinking about this in such moralistic terms. Right and wrong, deserve and innocent. Those concepts are so temporal, so bound to brief human lives and brief human perspectives. You're talking about children dying, aging backward until they disappear. How is that not wrong? They're not dying, Daniel. They're being unmade. It's quite different." Constance leaned forward slightly, her expression taking on an almost educational quality, like a teacher explaining a difficult concept. "When your son reaches age 4, he'll begin losing time. Days will pass, but he'll grow younger instead of older. He'll lose memories, lose skills, regress through infancy. And then, when he reaches the age he was conceived, he'll simply cease to have existed. Clean, elegant, no corpse to bury." Daniel's hands were shaking so badly, he had to set down his teacup. "You're talking about my son like he's a a resource you're harvesting. Because that's exactly what he is. Constance's smile never wavered. Every Ashford male is born with a certain amount of potential time, years they could live if allowed to age naturally. The curse harvests that time before they can use it, and transfers it to me. Your son will provide approximately 70 years of life expectancy, which means I'll live 70 years longer than I would have otherwise. Unless I stop you. And how do you plan to do that? Kill me? Constance gestured around the room. I've been alive for over 3 centuries, Daniel. Do you think you're the first person to try violence? Your great-great-grandfather came here in 1887 with a gun. He shot me 6 times. I healed within hours. She pulled down the collar of her sweater, revealing what looked like an old burned scar. Your great-uncle tried fire in 1943. That was unpleasant but ultimately ineffective. Daniel felt his hope crumbling. Then what am I supposed to do? Just accept that my son is going to fade. Most fathers do. They watch it happen, they grieve, and they move on. Sometimes they have more children, hoping for a daughter next time. Constance picked up her tea again. But a few fathers, the desperate ones like you, come here and ask for a bargain. Like my mother did. Catherine, yes. Lovely woman. She paid well for your protection. Constance's smile turned sly. Would you like to know what she gave me? Daniel wasn't sure he did, but he nodded anyway. Her voice, Constance said simply. Catherine was a singer. Did you know that? Quite talented. She could have had a professional career if circumstances had been different. She gave me her ability to sing, to speak above a whisper, to make any sound louder than a breath. She lived the rest of her life in near silence for you. Daniel felt like he'd been punched. His mother had never sung, never raised her voice, always spoke so quietly that people had to lean in to hear her. He'd thought it was just her personality, her gentle nature. He'd never imagined it was a sacrifice she'd made to keep him alive. That's monstrous, he whispered. That's love, Constance corrected. She chose to give up something precious to her so you could live. That's what parents do, isn't it? Sacrifice for their children. What would you want from me? For my son's protection. Constance's eyes gleamed with interest. Ah, now we're negotiating. Good. I do enjoy these conversations. They're one of the few interesting aspects of immortality. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at her gardens. What I want from you, Daniel Ashford, is considerably more than I took from your mother. Why more? Because I'm running out of Ashford males. The bloodline is thin now, spread across too few families. Your son might be one of the last in his generation. She turned back to face him. If I let him live and he has sons of his own, those sons will provide more time. But if he fades as planned, and you and Claire don't have another child, that particular branch of the family ends. Daniel tried to process what she was saying. You want me to guarantee more descendants? Partially, but also. Constance moved closer, studying him with unsettling intensity. I'm curious about something. What would you give up to save your son, Daniel? What part of yourself would you sacrifice? Anything, whatever you want. Anything is a dangerous word to use with someone like me. Constance circled him slowly, like a predator evaluating prey. Your health? Your career? Your relationship with Claire? Your memories of being loved by your mother? Be specific, Daniel. What would you trade? Daniel thought about his life, about everything he had and everything he was, and he realized there was only one thing he couldn't imagine living without. Not Claire, he said firmly. Whatever bargain we make, it can't affect her. She doesn't even know about the curse. She can't be part of this. Constance's smile grew wider, more genuinely delighted. Oh, how fascinating. You'd sacrifice yourself completely, but not your wife. That's quite sweet, really. She returned to her chair. Very well. Here's my offer. I'll protect your son. Extend the protection to any grandsons he might have. Ensure the Ashford bloodline continues for 3 more generations. In exchange for what? Your happiness, Constance said simply. All of it. Every moment of joy, contentment, satisfaction, or peace you might experience for the rest of your life. You'll wake up every morning in quiet despair. You'll love Claire and your son, but that love will bring you no joy. Success will feel hollow, pleasure will be impossible, and every happy moment anyone else experiences will feel like glass cutting into your soul. Daniel stared at her, trying to understand the full scope of what she was offering. I'll be depressed for the rest of my life, far beyond clinical depression. This will be a supernatural removal of your capacity for positive emotion. You'll function, go through the motions, but you'll never feel anything good ever again. Constance leaned back, clearly enjoying his horror. Your son will grow up happy and healthy, but you'll watch his childhood with complete emotional distance. Claire will love you, and you'll feel nothing but emptiness in return. You'll live a long life, and every single day will feel like drowning. Daniel couldn't find words for how monstrous the offer was. That's the price of love, Constance said. Your happiness for his life. Quite poetic, really. And before you ask, yes, this is significantly worse than what your mother gave up. Because you're asking for significantly more protection. Daniel thought about his son, still safely in Claire's womb, unaware that his father was sitting in a house in Vermont negotiating for his survival. He thought about watching his child grow up. First words, first steps, school plays, graduations, wedding, grandchildren, and feeling nothing but gray emptiness during all of it. Could he live that way? Could he survive decades of emotional numbness while pretending to be a normal husband and father? You're thinking about refusing, Constance observed. That's wise. Most people don't understand what they're agreeing to until it's too late. The absence of happiness is far worse than the presence of sadness. How long do I have to decide? Until your son is born. Once he enters the world, the curse is fully activated. The bargain must be made before then. Daniel stood on shaky legs. I need time to think about this. Of course. Take all the time you need. Constance walked him to the door. But Daniel, don't try to find another way. There isn't one. I'm the only one who can modify the curse, and this is my only offer. You can accept my terms and save your son, or you can refuse and watch him fade. Those are your only options. As Daniel drove away from the house, he looked in the rearview mirror and saw Constance standing in her doorway, watching him leave with that same pleasant smile. She was right about one thing. She had him completely trapped, and she knew it. Chapter 5. Daniel drove for an hour before he had to pull over. His hands were shaking too badly to control the car, and he felt like he might be sick. He sat in a rest area parking lot, watching families come and go, parents with children, couples holding hands, people living normal lives where the worst problems were traffic and work stress and what to make for dinner. None of them knew what it was like to negotiate with someone who had stolen 300 years of life from her own descendants. None of them had to choose between their own happiness and their child's existence. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. How's the work thing going? Miss you. Baby's been kicking all day. I think he knows you're not here. Daniel stared at the message. Baby's been kicking. Their son? Alive and moving. Unaware that his entire future hung on a decision his father had to make. He called Thomas. Daniel? How did it go? She offered me a deal. Daniel's voice sounded hollow even to himself. Protection for 3 generations in exchange for my happiness. All of it. Forever. A long silence. Jesus, Daniel. That's worse than what your mother gave up. I know. Daniel watched a family walk past his car. 2 parents and 3 kids, laughing about something. I don't know what to do, Thomas. If I accept, I save my son, but I'll never be able to enjoy being a father. If I refuse, I watch him fade and live with that guilt forever. There has to be another way. Constance says there isn't, and I believe her. She's had 3 centuries to perfect this system. What are you going to tell Claire? Daniel hadn't even thought that far ahead. Claire, who was glowing with joy about their son, who had no idea that her husband was contemplating a bargain that would hollow him out emotionally for the rest of his life. I don't know. How do I explain any of this? You might have to. This isn't the kind of decision you can make alone. But Daniel knew he couldn't tell Claire. If he explained the curse, she'd either think he was having a breakdown, or she'd believe him and spend the rest of her pregnancy in terror. And if he explained Constance's offer, Claire would never forgive herself for being the reason he'd sacrificed his happiness. No, this decision was his alone. Daniel drove the rest of the way home in a fog. When he walked through the door, Claire was waiting with dinner and that radiant smile that came from carrying their child. "How was Vermont?" she asked, kissing him. "Fine. Got everything sorted out." The lie came easily now. He'd gotten so good at lying to her. Over dinner, Claire talked about baby names. "I was thinking maybe we could name him after your mother? Catherine works for a girl, but for a boy maybe Kate's middle name." She didn't have a middle name on her birth certificate. "Really? That's unusual." Claire reached across the table to take his hand. "You never talk much about her. What was she like?" Daniel thought about his mother, her quiet voice, her gentle presence, the way she'd always seemed to be listening to something just beyond hearing. Now he understood why. She'd given up her voice to protect him, lived in near silence so he could live at all. "She was selfless," Daniel said finally. "She gave up everything for me." That night, Daniel lay awake thinking about Constance's offer. Could he really live without happiness? What would that even feel like? He tried to imagine watching his son take his first steps and feeling nothing, holding Claire and feeling empty, achieving success at work and experiencing only hollowness. It would be a kind of death, wouldn't it? A death of everything that made life worth living, while his body kept functioning and going through the motions. But the alternative was watching his son age backwards, seeing him lose words, lose memories, regress to infancy and then fade away as if he'd never existed. Living with the knowledge that he could have prevented it but chose his own happiness over his child's life. That would destroy him too, just in a different way. Over the next few weeks, Daniel spiraled. He couldn't sleep, could barely eat, went through the motions at work like a zombie. Claire kept asking what was wrong, her concern growing as Daniel became more distant. "You need to see a doctor," she said one evening. "This isn't normal stress. You're not yourself." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Daniel, I'm worried about you. Ever since that ultrasound, you've been different. Is this about the baby? Are you scared of being a father?" "I'm not scared." That was true, at least. He wasn't scared of being a father. He was scared of not being able to feel anything about being a father. "Then what is it? Please, just talk to me." Daniel looked at his wife, 7 months pregnant now, their son clearly visible as her belly moved when he kicked. She deserved the truth. She deserved to understand what was happening. But how could he explain it in a way she'd believe? "There's something wrong with my family," he said finally. "Genetic. It affects male children." Claire's nurse instincts kicked in immediately. "What kind of genetic condition? Have you talked to our OB? We can do genetic testing, prepare for whatever. It's not something modern medicine can fix." "Daniel, that's not true. We have treatments for almost everything now. And even if there's no cure, we can manage symptoms, improve quality of life." "Not this." Daniel stood up, needing to move. "Claire, I need you to trust me. There's something very wrong, and I'm trying to fix it, but I can't explain all the details right now." "That's not good enough. This is our son we're talking about. I have a right to know what's going on." She was right. Of course she was right. But telling her the truth would be worse than keeping it secret. What could she do with the knowledge that their son was cursed? Nothing except worry herself sick for the rest of the pregnancy. "After he's born," Daniel said. "After the baby's born, I'll explain everything. I promise." It was another lie. He was collecting them now, each one adding weight to the crushing burden of what he knew. That night, Daniel pulled out Margaret's journal again and reread the entries about Constance, looking for any hint of a weakness, any suggestion of another way to break the curse. But there was nothing. Every Ashford who had tried to fight Constance had failed. Every father who had tried violence or magic or any other solution had watched their son fade. The only ones who had succeeded were the ones who had made bargains, trading pieces of themselves to buy protection for one generation. Daniel found an entry near the end of the journal that he'd missed before. I wonder sometimes if Constance even remembers being human, if she recalls what it felt like to love Jacob, to grieve when he died, to be desperate enough to make a bargain with something dark in those woods. Or has immortality burned all of that away? Has she lived so long that she's forgotten how to feel anything except the mild amusement she shows when we beg for our children's lives? I think that's the real horror of what she's become. Not that she's evil, but that she's empty. 300 years have made her into something that looks human but isn't anymore. Something that can sit across from a grieving mother and discuss child sacrifice over tea. If there's a worse fate than death, it might be living long enough to lose every human quality except the shape of your body. Daniel closed the journal and looked at the calendar. Claire was due in 2 months. That was how long he had to decide whether to accept Constance's bargain. 2 months to choose between his happiness and his son's life. 2 months to decide what kind of father he was going to be, the kind who sacrificed everything or the kind who couldn't save his child when he had the chance. Chapter 6. The decision came to Daniel at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, 6 weeks before Claire's due date. He'd been dreaming about his mother. Not a memory, but something his sleeping mind had constructed. Catherine singing, her voice clear and beautiful, filling a room with sound. In the dream, she was telling him something important, but he couldn't hear the words under the music. When he woke up, he understood. His mother had given up her voice to save him. Thomas's mother had given up her fertility. Both of them had made choices that hollowed out parts of their lives so their sons could live. And neither of them had regretted it, despite the cost. That was what it meant to be a parent. To sacrifice parts of yourself so your child could exist. Daniel looked at Claire sleeping beside him, her hand resting on her belly where their son moved in his sleep. He thought about Constance's offer. Never feeling joy again. Watching his son grow up from behind a wall of emotional emptiness. Loving Claire but feeling nothing when she smiled at him. It would be a kind of death, but his son would live. Daniel made his decision. The next morning he called Thomas. I'm going to accept Constance's offer. A long pause. Daniel, are you sure? You understand what you're giving up. I understand. My mother gave up her voice for me. The least I can do is give up my happiness for my son. Your mother didn't have to live the rest of her life feeling nothing good. That's different than losing one sense. She chose to live in silence rather than watch me fade. I'm making the same choice. Daniel's voice was steady now that the decision was made. I need you to promise me something, Thomas. What? If this goes wrong, if Constance breaks her word, if my son starts to fade anyway, I need you to tell Claire the truth, everything. She'll need to understand why it happened and that I tried to stop it. Daniel, promise me. I promise. But I don't think you're going to need me to. Constance may be monstrous, but she keeps her bargains. That's what makes her so dangerous. She's perfectly honest about the price, and she always delivers what she promises. Daniel drove to Vermont the next day, telling Claire he had one more work emergency to handle before the baby came. She was getting frustrated with his absences, but he'd make it up to her somehow. After the baby was born, after the curse was broken, he'd find a way to be a better husband, even if he couldn't feel anything about being better. Constance answered the door before he knocked, that same pleasant smile on her face. Daniel, I was wondering when you'd return. Have you made your decision? I accept your offer. My happiness in exchange for 3 generations of protection. How delightfully tragic. Constance stepped aside to let him in. Though I must say you took longer to decide than most. Your mother agreed within minutes. They sat in the same sitting room where they'd negotiated before. This time, Constance didn't offer tea. This was business now, not social performance. Before we finalize the bargain, let me make sure you understand exactly what you're agreeing to, Constance said. From the moment the binding takes effect, you will never experience joy, contentment, satisfaction, or peace. You'll be able to function, go to work, interact with people, care for your family. But there will be no positive emotional reward for any of it. I understand. Your son will smile at you, and you'll feel nothing. Claire will tell you she loves you, and the words will be meaningless. You'll achieve success, and it will feel hollow. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone will feel like going through empty motions. I understand, Daniel repeated. And here's the part most people don't consider. You won't be able to remember what happiness felt like. The memories of joy you have now will become abstract, like reading about an emotion you've never experienced. You'll know intellectually that you used to be happy, but you won't be able to access what that actually felt like. Daniel felt a chill. He hadn't considered that part. Not only would he lose the ability to feel happiness going forward, but he'd lose the memory of what he was giving up. That's still the offer? He asked. That's still the offer. Then I accept. Constance smiled. Not her usual cordial expression, but something that looked almost like genuine respect. You know, in 300 years, I've made dozens of these bargains. But I've never had someone accept a deal this terrible without at least trying to negotiate for better terms. Your mother begged me to take something else. Thomas's mother offered everything she had. But you, she tilted her head, studying him. You just accept. Why? Because you already told me you don't negotiate. This is your only offer, and my son needs protection. What's the point of begging for something you won't give? How pragmatic. Constance stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out what looked like an old contract written in ink on yellowed paper. The binding requires formal agreement. You'll sign here acknowledging the terms. Once signed, the protection begins immediately and cannot be reversed. Daniel read through the contract. It was written in archaic language, but the meaning was clear. Constance Ashford agreed to exempt Daniel Ashford's male descendants from the curse of regression for 3 generations, in exchange for the complete and permanent removal of Daniel Ashford's capacity for positive emotional experience. The contract specified that the protection would extend to Daniel's son, any sons his son might have, and any sons those grandsons might have. After 3 generations, the curse would resume unless a new bargain was made. What happens in 3 generations if no one makes a new deal? Daniel asked. Then your great-great-grandsons will fade like all the others. But 3 generations is a long time, Daniel. Perhaps by then, someone will have found a way to break the curse entirely. Or perhaps the bloodline will end naturally. Or perhaps one of your descendants will come here and make their own bargain. Constance handed him a pen, modern, incongruous with the ancient contract. Once you sign, there's no going back. Are you absolutely certain? Daniel thought about his son, still unnamed, still safely in Claire's womb. He thought about holding his child for the first time, and knowing he wouldn't feel anything. He thought about Claire asking him if he was happy, and having to lie because the truth would break her heart. He thought about his mother, living in silence for 26 years so he could live at all. I'm certain. Daniel signed the contract. The effect wasn't immediate. Constance took the signed document and placed it back in the cabinet, then turned to Daniel with that same smile. The binding will take full effect when your son is born. Until then, you'll experience a gradual diminishment of positive emotions. A transitional period so the change isn't traumatically sudden. How gradual? You'll probably start noticing it within a few days. By the time Claire goes into labor, you'll be about halfway transitioned. By the time you hold your son for the first time, the binding will be complete. Daniel stood to leave, but Constance stopped him with a hand on his arm. One more thing, Daniel. I want you to know that I don't enjoy this. The bargains, the curse, watching fathers sacrifice themselves for their sons. None of it brings me pleasure anymore. Then why do you keep doing it? Because I made my own bargain 300 years ago, and I don't remember how to be anything other than what I've become. For just a moment, something that might have been sadness flickered across her face. I wonder sometimes what it would be like to die, to finally stop feeding on my descendants and just end. But I don't remember how to want that either. Immortality has burned away everything except the basic drive to continue existing. She released his arm. In a way, you and I will be similar soon, going through the motions of life without actually feeling it. The difference is you chose this. I'm not sure I remember making a choice anymore. Daniel left the house without responding. What could he say to someone who had lived so long she'd forgotten how to be human? As he drove away, he looked back one last time and saw Constance standing in her doorway, watching him leave. And for the first time, she didn't look amused or cordial or coy. She just looked tired. Chapter 7. The diminishment began 3 days after Daniel signed the contract. He was having coffee with Claire, listening to her talk about the nursery she'd finished setting up, when he realized that the warmth he usually felt when she smiled at him was less. Not gone, but muted, like watching a sunset through a foggy window. "Daniel? You okay?" "Yeah. Just tired." But it wasn't tiredness. It was the beginning of emptiness. Over the next few weeks, Daniel watched his emotional range narrow like a lens slowly closing. Things that used to make him happy, Claire's laugh, good news at work, a beautiful day, started feeling like he was observing them from a distance. He could recognize that they were supposed to be positive, but the actual feeling was increasingly absent. Claire noticed. Of course she noticed. "You've been so quiet lately. Is everything okay with work?" "Work's fine." "Is it the baby? Are you getting cold feet?" "No. I want the baby." That was still true, at least in an abstract sense. He wanted his son to exist, to be safe, to grow up healthy. He just couldn't access the emotional connection to that want anymore. "Then what is it?" "Daniel, you barely smile anymore. You don't laugh. It's like you're here, but you're not really here." "I'm sorry." He meant it, even though he couldn't feel the remorse he should have felt. "I'm just going through something. It'll be better after the baby comes." It was a lie. After the baby came, it would be worse. But Claire didn't need to know that. Thomas called a week before Claire's due date. "How are you holding up?" "It's happening. The emotions are fading. It's like..." Daniel struggled to find words for what he was experiencing. "It's like someone's slowly turning down the volume on everything good. I can still remember being happy, but it's getting harder to understand what that felt like." "Jesus, Daniel. The baby's due next week. By then, it'll be complete. And you're still sure about this? Does it matter? I signed the contract. There's no backing out." "I know, but..." "Thomas, I need you to do something for me. After the baby's born, after I'm completely empty, I need you to check on me sometimes. Call me. Make sure I'm functioning. Because I don't think I'll be able to tell anymore whether I'm okay or not. I'll check on you. I promise." Claire went into labor on a Thursday morning, 3 days before her due date. Daniel drove her to the hospital with a calm that would have looked like steady competence to an observer, but which he knew was just numbness. He should have been nervous, excited, scared, all the normal father emotions. Instead, he just felt nothing. Labor lasted 14 hours. Daniel sat beside Claire, holding her hand, saying encouraging things that felt mechanical. He could see that she was in pain, could recognize intellectually that he should want to help her, but there was no emotional urgency to it. "You're being so calm," Claire said between contractions. "I'm glad you're not freaking out." If she only knew. He wasn't calm, he was empty. At 11:47 p.m., their son was born. The doctor placed the baby on Claire's chest, and Daniel watched his wife cry with joy as she held their child for the first time. The baby was perfect. Pink and wrinkled and screaming, exactly as a newborn should be. "Daniel," Claire said through happy tears, "look at him. Look at our son." Daniel looked. He could see objectively that his son was healthy, that this moment was supposed to be profound, that he should be feeling overwhelming emotion. But there was nothing, just empty observation of a biological event. And in that moment, as he looked at his son and felt nothing, the binding completed. The last traces of positive emotion drained away, leaving behind only gray existence. "Do you want to hold him?" Claire asked. Daniel took his son carefully, supporting the tiny head the way they'd learned in birthing class. The baby stopped crying and looked up at him with unfocused newborn eyes. His son. His child. The person he'd sacrificed everything to save. Daniel felt nothing. "What should we name him?" Claire asked. They'd discussed names for months, narrowing it down to 3 options. Daniel had preferred Jacob, his mother's father's name, though he'd never known that was also the name of Constance's son who had died in 1673. But now, looking at the baby in his arms, he couldn't remember why that name had seemed important. Jacob, he said, because Claire had liked that name too. Jacob Ashford. Claire smiled. It's perfect. Over the next few days in the hospital, Daniel went through the motions of being a new father. He changed diapers, he helped with feedings, he took pictures for Claire's family. Everyone commented on how calm and capable he was, how he seemed like a natural father. No one noticed that he was dead inside. When they brought Jacob home, Claire's mother came to stay for a week to help. She kept commenting on what a happy baby Jacob was. How alert and healthy. You two are so lucky, she said. Some babies cry all the time, but Jacob is such a joy. Daniel looked at his son. Sleeping peacefully in the bassinet they'd set up in the bedroom, and tried to access what joy might feel like. But the concept was alien now, as abstract as trying to remember a smell from childhood. Claire noticed something was wrong about 2 weeks after they brought Jacob home. Daniel, are you okay with being a father? Because you don't seem happy. I'm fine. But you never smile at him. You take care of him, you do everything right. But it's like you're going through a checklist instead of actually enjoying being with him. I'm just tired. New parents are always tired. It's not tiredness. It's something else. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Do you regret having him? Be honest with me. I don't regret it. That was true. Even without the emotional capacity to feel regret, Daniel knew intellectually that he'd made the right choice. Jacob was alive, healthy, growing normally. He wasn't going to age backwards and fade away. The curse was broken. The cost was just higher than Daniel had really understood when he'd agreed to it. Then what is it? Please talk to me. I can't do this alone. You're not alone. I'm here. But you're not really here. You're like a ghost going through the motions. She was right, of course. That's exactly what he was. A ghost of the person he used to be, performing the role of husband and father without any of the emotional connection that made those roles meaningful. Over the following months, Daniel's life became a careful performance. He learned to fake smiles at the right moments, to say, I love you, with the appropriate tone, to act interested when Claire talked about Jacob's development. He researched normal father behavior and mimicked it, creating the appearance of engagement without the actual feeling. Jacob grew quickly, hitting all his developmental milestones on schedule. First smile, which Daniel viewed with clinical detachment. First laugh, which sounded like noise. First word, which Claire celebrated while Daniel watched from his emotional distance. Claire kept asking if he was depressed, if he needed to see a therapist, if there was something medically wrong. Daniel scheduled appointments to reassure her, went through the motions of therapy sessions, took the antidepressants they prescribed even though he knew they wouldn't help. This wasn't clinical depression. This was supernatural removal of his capacity for positive emotion. Thomas called every few weeks to check on him. How are you managing? I'm functioning. That's not what I asked. It's the only answer I have. I get up, I go to work, I take care of Jacob, I interact with Claire. I do everything I'm supposed to do. I just don't feel anything about any of it. Does Claire know? She knows something's wrong, but she doesn't know what. I can't tell her. What would I say? Sorry, honey, but I traded away my happiness to save our son from a 300-year-old curse. She'd have me committed. Maybe you should tell her anyway. Living with this secret on top of the emotional numbness. The secret is all I have left, Thomas. It's the only thing that makes this bearable. Knowing that I chose this, that it meant something, that Jacob is safe because of what I gave up. If I tell Claire and she doesn't believe me, then I'm just a broken husband who can't connect with his family for no reason. Chapter 8. Jacob turned 3 on a Thursday. Claire organized a small birthday party with a few neighborhood kids and their parents. She'd made a dinosaur cake that Jacob was excited about. Daniel could see the excitement objectively, could observe his son's wide smile and bright eyes, but couldn't access any emotional response to it. Make a wish, buddy, Claire said, holding Jacob up to blow out the candles. Jacob squeezed his eyes shut, taking the wish very seriously, then blew out all 3 candles in one breath. Everyone clapped. Daniel clapped too, the motion mechanical. After the party, when the guests had left and Jacob was playing with his new toys, Claire found Daniel in the kitchen. That was a good party, wasn't it? Yes. Jacob seemed happy. Daniel, we need to talk. He'd been expecting this conversation for months. Claire's patience had been eroding, her frustration with his emotional distance growing more obvious. Okay. I can't do this anymore. Living with someone who acts like they care but doesn't feel anything. It's like being married to a very polite stranger. I do care. Then show me. Give me something real. Something that isn't just you going through the motions. Claire's eyes filled with tears. I love you, Daniel. I've loved you since the day we met. But I can't keep loving someone who can't love me back. I do love you. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're just saying words you think you're supposed to say. When was the last time you actually felt anything for me? For Jacob? For anyone? Daniel could pinpoint the exact moment, 11:47 p.m. on the night Jacob was born, when the last traces of positive emotion had drained away. But he couldn't tell her that. I know I've been distant. Distant? Daniel, you're absent. You're here physically, but emotionally you're gone. And I don't know how to reach you anymore. What do you want me to do? I want you to fix this. See a different therapist, try different medication, something. Because if you can't. She took a shaky breath. I've been thinking that maybe we need to separate for a while. Give you space to work on whatever's going on, and give me space to figure out if I can live like this. The words should have hurt. They should have triggered panic, fear, desperate attempts to fix the situation. Instead, Daniel just felt the same empty observation he felt about everything. If that's what you need to do. See? That right there. Claire was crying now. I just told you I'm considering leaving you, and you react like I told you we're out of milk. No emotion, no fight, nothing. I don't want you to leave. But do you feel that? Or is it just another thing you know you're supposed to say? Daniel couldn't answer honestly. He knew intellectually that he should want Claire to stay, that losing his family would be terrible, that he should fight for his marriage. But he couldn't access the emotional urgency that would make any of those feelings real. That night, Claire slept in the guest room. Daniel lay alone in their bed, staring at the ceiling, processing the conversation with the same detachment he processed everything. His marriage was falling apart. His wife was talking about leaving. His son was growing up with a father who couldn't feel anything for him. And Daniel couldn't muster enough emotional response to any of it to even try to fix it. This was what he'd traded for. This empty existence was the price of keeping Jacob safe from the curse. Was it worth it? He didn't know. He couldn't feel strongly enough about anything to make that judgment. The next morning, Daniel made a decision. He couldn't tell Claire about the curse. She wouldn't believe it, and even if she did, it wouldn't change anything. But maybe he could tell her part of the truth. Enough to help her understand without revealing the impossible parts. He found her in the kitchen making breakfast for Jacob. Claire, I need to tell you something. She looked at him warily. Okay. Before Jacob was born, I found out about a genetic condition in my family. It affects male children. I was terrified that Jacob would have it. What kind of genetic condition? It's complicated and rare, but I was so scared that I made some choices I shouldn't have made. I got obsessed with trying to prevent it, and in the process, I think Daniel struggled to find words for something he couldn't really explain. I think I broke something in myself. The worry, the stress, the fear. It changed me somehow. It wasn't the truth, but it was close enough. And it gave Claire a framework to understand his behavior without having to explain curses and bargains and immortal ancestors. Why didn't you tell me this before? I didn't want to worry you during the pregnancy. And after Jacob was born healthy, I thought the fear would go away. But it didn't. It's like I used up all my emotional capacity being terrified for him, and now there's nothing left. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Is that why you've been so distant? Because you burned yourself out worrying about Jacob? Yes. Relief flooded through Daniel. Not an emotion, but the intellectual recognition that she was accepting this explanation. Daniel, that's actually treatable. Post-traumatic stress, emotional burnout, there are therapies specifically for that. Why didn't you tell your therapist? I don't know. Maybe I didn't realize that's what it was until now. Claire moved closer, taking his hands. Okay, we can work with this. You'll get proper treatment, we'll find a therapist who specializes in this kind of trauma response, and we'll fix it. Together. Daniel looked at his wife's hopeful face and felt nothing. But he nodded anyway. Together. Over the next few months, Daniel went through intensive therapy for trauma and emotional burnout. He learned coping mechanisms, practiced mindfulness exercises, tried every treatment his therapist recommended. None of it worked, of course. You couldn't therapy your way out of a supernatural binding, but it gave Claire hope, and that seemed to stabilize their marriage. Claire stopped talking about separation. She started treating Daniel like someone recovering from an illness rather than someone who was fundamentally broken. It wasn't the marriage they'd had before Jacob, but it was something they could both live with. Jacob continued to grow, developing normally, showing no signs of the curse that should have claimed him by now. He was approaching 4 years old, the age when Ashford males historically began to regress, and he was healthy, happy, advancing in his development instead of reversing. The bargain was working. Constance had kept her word. But as Daniel watched his son's 4th birthday party, seeing Jacob laugh with friends, blow out candles, open presents with genuine excitement, he couldn't shake the feeling that the price might have been too high after all. He'd saved his son's life but lost his own ability to experience it. Jacob would grow up with a father who was present but absent, caring but cold, loving in theory but not in practice. Was that better than fading away at age 6? Objectively, yes. A long life without emotional connection from one parent was better than no life at all. But there were moments, like now, watching Jacob's joy while feeling nothing, when Daniel wondered if there was a middle ground he should have fought harder to find. Thomas called that night, his regular check-in. How was the party? Good. Jacob's 4 now. No signs of regression. That's great, Daniel. That's what you wanted. I know. You don't sound happy about it. I can't sound happy about anything. You know that. I know. But I keep hoping. Thomas trailed off. Hoping what? That the curse would break somehow. That keeping your end of the bargain would be enough to undo the binding. I know it's stupid. It's not stupid. Daniel looked through the doorway to where Claire was tucking Jacob into bed. His son's sleepy face content and safe. But Constance doesn't work that way. She keeps her bargains exactly as stated. No more and no less. Jacob is protected for 3 generations. I lost my happiness permanently. Those are the terms. Have you ever thought about going back? Trying to renegotiate? Every day. But what would I offer her that's more valuable than what I already gave up? There's nothing left of me to trade. After hanging up, Daniel sat in the dark living room and did something he hadn't done in years. Tried to remember what happiness felt like. He had memories of being happy, could recall specific moments. The day Claire agreed to marry him, the first time she told him she was pregnant, holding Jacob right after he was born. But he couldn't access the actual emotion. The memories were there, but the feeling that had accompanied them was gone. Like trying to remember a taste you'd once experienced but could no longer imagine. This was his life now. Going through the motions, performing the role of father and husband, watching his son grow up from behind a wall of emotional numbness that would never fade. At least Jacob was safe. At least the curse was broken for 3 generations. At least Daniel had made the same sacrifice his mother had made for him, giving up something precious so his child could live. In the darkness of the living room, Daniel did something that might have been crying if he still had the capacity for it. His body went through the physical motions. Tears, shaking, gasping breaths. But there was no emotional release, no catharsis, no relief. Just empty performance of grief for the life he'd traded away. Epilogue 20 years later. Jacob Ashford graduated from college on a bright spring day, accepting his diploma in computer science with the same quiet competence his father had shown throughout his life. Daniel sat in the audience beside Claire, watching their son, now a man, shake hands with the dean and smile for the cameras. He did it, Claire whispered, squeezing Daniel's hand. Our baby graduated. Yes, he did well. Daniel had been saying variations of those words for 23 years now. Appropriate responses, correct emotional cues, the performance of a proud father. Claire had long since stopped questioning his muted reactions, had accepted that her husband's emotional trauma had left permanent marks. Their marriage had survived, though it was different than either of them had imagined. Claire had learned to find fulfillment in Jacob's development, in her work, in friendships and hobbies that didn't require Daniel's emotional participation. She still loved him, in the way you love someone you've built a life with despite their limitations. And Daniel had learned to be a functional father even without the feelings that should have come with it. He'd attended every school event, helped with homework, taught Jacob to drive, given advice when asked. He'd done everything a good father should do. He just hadn't felt anything about any of it. After the ceremony, Jacob found them in the crowd. At 23, he looked remarkably like Daniel had at that age. Same build, same features, same thoughtful expression. Hey Dad. Mom. Jacob hugged Claire, then turned to Daniel with a handshake that had become their standard greeting. Thanks for coming. We wouldn't have missed it, Claire said. We're so proud of you. Yeah, Daniel added. Congratulations. Actually, I wanted to talk to you both about something. Jacob looked uncomfortable. Rachel and I have been talking, and we're thinking about getting engaged. Rachel was Jacob's girlfriend of 2 years. A kind young woman who worked as a teacher. Daniel had met her several times and recognized objectively that she would make a good partner for his son. That's wonderful. Claire hugged Jacob again. Oh honey, I'm so happy for you. Dad. Daniel looked at his son. The boy he'd sacrificed everything to save, now grown into a man who was starting his own life. He should feel pride, joy, nostalgia for how quickly time had passed. He should feel something. She's a good choice. I'm sure you'll be happy together. It was the same bland approval Daniel had given to everything in Jacob's life. Adequate but empty, supportive but cold. Jacob's expression flickered with something that might have been disappointment, but he covered it quickly. Thanks, Dad. That evening, back at the hotel, Claire confronted Daniel with the same frustration she'd been expressing in various forms for over 2 decades. You could have tried harder. Jacob just told us he's getting engaged, and you acted like he'd told you about a new phone plan. I congratulated him. You went through the motions, like you always do. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking very tired. Sometimes I wonder if you'd feel anything if something actually important happened, or if you just continue going through these empty motions until one of us dies. That's not fair, isn't it? Daniel, I've spent 23 years making excuses for why you can't emotionally connect with our son. At some point, don't you think you could try harder? For Jacob? For me? How could Daniel explain that trying harder wasn't possible? That he wasn't withholding emotion deliberately? He literally didn't have access to it anymore? I do the best I can. Is this really the best you can do? Because Jacob grew up thinking his father doesn't care about him. Do you understand what that's done to him? How hard he's tried to earn some kind of genuine reaction from you. Daniel did understand, at least intellectually. He'd watched Jacob's increasing efforts to impress him over the years, better grades, athletic achievements, college acceptance, now this engagement announcement. Each attempt met with the same muted approval. His son had grown up starving for emotional validation that Daniel couldn't provide. I'm sorry. Sorry isn't enough. Sorry doesn't give Jacob the father he deserved. Claire turned away. Sometimes I wish you'd just told me the truth back when he was a baby. Whatever really happened to you, whatever you're still hiding. At least then I could understand. Would it matter? Would understanding change anything? Maybe not. But at least I'd know whether my husband is broken or just doesn't care. Daniel left Claire in the hotel room and walked through the evening streets of the college town. He passed groups of celebrating families, saw fathers hugging their graduated children, heard laughter and joy and all the emotions he couldn't access. His phone rang. Thomas. Hey Daniel. Heard Jacob graduated. Congratulations. Thanks. How are you holding up? The same way I've been holding up for 23 years. By not feeling anything about it. I saw Jacob's engagement announcement on social media. That's exciting. He told us today. Claire's upset that I didn't react more enthusiastically. Can you blame her? Daniel, I know you can't feel it, but from the outside, you look like you don't care about your own son. I know, but what am I supposed to do? Fake it better. Maybe you need to tell them the truth. Jacob's an adult now. Claire has spent over 2 decades wondering what's wrong with you. Don't they deserve to know? They won't believe me. You don't know that. And even if they don't believe the curse part, at least they'd understand that you didn't choose this. That you sacrificed yourself deliberately to save Jacob. Daniel thought about that as he walked. Would it matter to Jacob and Claire if they knew the truth? Would it change how they saw him, or would they just think he was delusional on top of being emotionally absent? But Thomas was right about one thing: they deserved to know he tried. That he'd made a choice even if it was the wrong one. When Daniel returned to the hotel, Claire was in bed but clearly not asleep. Claire, I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen, even if it sounds impossible. She sat up. Okay. Daniel took a breath and told her everything. The genealogical research, the pattern of male children dying young, Thomas and the journal, Constance and the curse, the bargain he'd made to save Jacob. Claire listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. You're saying you traded away your ability to feel happiness to save Jacob from a supernatural curse? Yes. And you've been living like this, emotionally dead, for 23 years because of a deal you made with an immortal ancestor? Yes. Daniel, that's... Claire's voice broke. That's either the most tragic thing I've ever heard, or you're having a severe psychological break. And I don't know which would be worse. I know it sounds insane, but it's the truth. Can you prove it? Can you show me this Constance person? Or the contract you signed? Or anything that would make this more than just an elaborate delusion? I have Margaret's journal. Thomas can confirm his part of the story. And Constance lives in Vermont. We could go there. Though I don't know if she'd talk to you. Claire was crying now. If this is true, if you really gave up your happiness to save Jacob, then I've spent 23 years being angry at you for the most selfless thing a father could do. And if it's not true, then you're sick and I've been failing to get you real help. I understand if you don't believe me. I don't know what I believe. But Daniel, even if this is all true, even if you really did save Jacob from this curse, was it worth it? Has living without emotions for 23 years really been better than losing him? It was the question Daniel had asked himself thousands of times. And finally, after more than 2 decades, he had an answer. I don't know if it was worth it for me, but Jacob is alive. He graduated college today. He's getting engaged to someone he loves. He has a whole life ahead of him. Daniel looked at Claire. If I had refused Constance's offer, Jacob would have started aging backwards at 4 years old. You would have watched him forget how to talk, forget how to walk, regress to infancy and then disappear. Could you have survived that? I don't know. I couldn't risk finding out. So yes, Claire, it was worth it. Because Jacob is here, and he's happy, and he's going to have the life that every Ashford male before him was denied. Even though he grew up thinking his father doesn't love him. He grew up knowing his father was present. That's more than most cursed Ashford children got. The next morning, Daniel told Jacob the same story. His son listened with the same skeptical expression Claire had worn, asking questions that Daniel answered as honestly as he could. So you're saying you're emotionally numb because you saved me from a family curse I didn't know existed? Yes. And you never told Mom or me because you thought we wouldn't believe you. Would you have believed me? Jacob was quiet for a long time. Probably not. But Dad, even if this is all true, you could have told us anyway. You could have let us know that you cared, even if you couldn't feel it. Instead, I grew up thinking I had a father who was just going through the motions. That's exactly what I was doing. Going through the motions. That's all I could do. But you could have told me why. You could have given me context for why my father acted like he didn't care about anything I did. Jacob's voice cracked. Do you have any idea what it's like growing up thinking your dad is disappointed in you? even though you can't figure out what you're doing wrong? I was never disappointed in you. I know that now, but I didn't know it then. I thought I was failing somehow, not living up to expectations I couldn't see. Daniel watched his son struggle with 23 years of misunderstood emotional distance, and wished desperately that he could feel remorse, guilt, regret. Anything that would make this conversation real instead of just another empty performance. I'm sorry. Are you? Can you even feel sorry? Or is that just another thing you know you're supposed to say? It was the same question Claire had been asking for decades, and the answer hadn't changed. I don't know anymore. I remember what sorry used to feel like, but I can't access it now. All I can tell you is that I made the choice I thought was right, and I'd make it again if I had to. Because you're alive, Jacob. You're here. And that matters more than anything else. Jacob left the hotel room without another word. Claire followed him, leaving Daniel alone with the same empty existence he'd inhabited for 23 years. He'd saved his son from the curse. But in doing so, he'd created a different kind of curse. One where Jacob grew up without the emotional connection every child deserved from their father. Maybe Constance had been right. Maybe there were prices too high to pay, even for a child's life. But it was too late now. The bargain was made, the binding was permanent, and Daniel would spend the rest of his life going through the motions of existence while feeling nothing about any of it. At least Jacob was alive. It had to be worth it. It had to be.